In this video, we're going to look at the real-time integration between Krow PSA and Intacct. Krow PSA offers real-time synchronization of data from Krow to Intacct, including project and task data, project resources, bill rates, timesheets, expenses, invoices, as well as vendor bills. So let's go ahead and take a look. So here I'm looking at a project in Krow, the new Intacct project. I've already synchronized this project over to Intacct for the purpose of the demonstration today. If I go ahead and look at the details of this project and scroll down, here I can see I've decided to send this project to Intacct by way of this checkbox. And what I can see here is Intacct has provided information back to Krow, including the auto-generated Intacct project ID, as well as the synchronization result. In this case, the record was synchronized successfully over to Intacct. Going back to my project for a moment. So if I'm looking at some project detail, I can see my task level information. I have 6 tasks currently on my project. I can also go ahead and take a look at the resources on this project, such as Gene and Vicus, with specific bill rates, as this is a time and expense project in this example. If I now navigate over to my Intacct environment, here I can see project information for this Intacct project, as well as if I switch over to the resource and pricing tab, I can see the 2 resources and their bill rates that came over from Krow. And furthermore, if I access the task tab, here I can see the 6 tasks that were synchronized over from Krow as well. So in this example, I'm just going to navigate back to my project in Krow. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new task, and I'll add a task 7 to be consistent with my other naming convention. I will assign a resource to this particular task, and I'll assign a date, August 1st in this example, to this task, and go ahead and click Save. So I've added a new task to my project, my task 7. Currently, the status is not started yet. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the status to in progress so I can enter some time and expense against it and synchronize that information over to Intacct. If I go ahead and navigate back to my Intacct environment for a moment, and I'll just refresh that page. So I've refreshed my Intacct project page. I'm still looking at my new Intacct project here. And if I navigate over to the task page, now you can see my task 7 that I created in Krow has been synchronized over to Intacct. Furthermore, what I can do is I'm just going to navigate back to my projects in Krow. So now that I've synchronized over this project and synchronized over new task information, I can start to enter in time and expense against this particular project. So I'm going to go ahead and navigate to my timesheet page. And what I'm going to do is when I access the My Timesheet page is I'm going to go back into my time period for this project, specifically August 1st, and then I can go ahead and choose my resource that I'm going to enter time for, in this case Vicus. So now what I can do is I can select that project, my new Intacct project, and select a task to enter time against. In this example, maybe I'll enter in 9 hours and save that time. And once I've saved that time, when I'm done entering in time, in this example, I can go ahead and submit that time for approval. So I've submitted that time for approval. Now, normally that would go through an approval process within Krow, but for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and look at the underlying timesheet that was submitted, as you can see here. So I can see here that 9 hours, it's in submitted status, and I'm going to go ahead and, as an administrator, and change that status from submitted to approved manually. And this is the trigger in Krow to send that timesheet information over to Intacct. And as I'm sending that information over to Intacct, Intacct is going to, again, bring me back confirmation information, including the Intacct-generated timesheet ID, as well as the synchronization results. And I'm just going to refresh this page. It might take a few times before I can see that data has come back successfully. Go ahead and refresh that again quickly. So here we go. Here I can see the record synchronized successfully, as well as the Intacct timesheet ID. So if I navigate now back into Intacct, and I will go ahead and look at timesheet information. And here's that information, that timesheet specifically that came over from Krow. And if I drill down onto that timesheet here, I can see the 9 hours of billable time that I entered for Monday against the new Intacct project. So an example of integrating timesheet information seamlessly over to Intacct. So in the next example, I'm going to look at creating an expense report, integrating that over. So let's go ahead and go to expenses, and I'll create a quick new expense report here. I'll choose in this example just any date. Choose my Intacct project. Choose my resource in this example and click Save. Then I can go ahead and add a new expense line. I'll choose any expense type, meals in this example, and choose $77 for my expense amount. Go ahead and click Save again. So now I've created just one expense line representing $77 in this expense report. Again, normally this would be submitted for approval, go through an approval process, but for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and update that to approved and click Save. So similar to timesheets, what's going to happen is that is a trigger to send that expense information over to Intacct, and when that information has been confirmed in Intacct, Intacct is going to send back information confirming the Intacct expense ID from Intacct as well as the synchronization result. Hopefully a successful confirmation, but if there was any issues for any reason, that synchronization result message would show here as well. So I can go ahead and refresh that page again. And here I can see Intacct ID generated for the expense as well as the record was successful in synchronizing over to Intacct. So again, if I navigate back to my Intacct environment, and here I'm just going to choose expenses this time. And here's my $77 expense that I can see right here. And if I just drill down on this expense report here, I can see it was the meals on this particular date on this expense type, which of course is mapped to Krow, as well as the amount in this example, $77. So far we've seen project data, task data, timesheet information, as well as expenses. Now that I've entered in all that information, what I could do now is I want to start to bill for this project data. So here I have options where I can generate an invoice directly in Intacct based on the information that was synchronized over from Krow, such as time and expense, or I can generate an invoice in Krow and send that invoice directly over to Intacct. So let's look at both of those. So the first example is I'm going to actually generate an invoice directly in Intacct. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose my project, and I'll drill down into the new Intacct project that we're looking at, and I can go ahead and preview that. So now this is going to generate the invoice using the standard invoice creation process in Intacct, using all of the underlying timesheet expense information in this example that came over from Krow. The second example, as I mentioned, was you could generate an invoice directly in Krow. Let me go ahead and take an invoice that we've already generated. So in this example, here I have an invoice total for $1,160 that was generated. And I can see the details of that invoice, such as the invoice line items and the expense information as well related to that particular invoice. But now what I'm going to do is I posted that invoice, which is the trigger to send that information over to Intacct as well. And I can go ahead now and navigate back into my Intacct environment. And let's go ahead and take a look at that invoice. So here's my $1,160 invoice that was generated and synchronized over from Krow. And I can go ahead and take a look at the details of that invoice as well. And the same applies to a vendor bill that might originate from Krow and be synchronized over to Intacct as well. So in summary, Krow offers real-time integration between Krow PSA and Intacct, specifically sending over information such as project data and task data, resources, rates, timesheets, expenses, invoices, as well as vendor bills.